Hello there people, this is Detective Steve and I'm going to be counting down my best and worst films of 2013. This list will be comprised of my top 5 favorite films of the year and my top 5 least favorite films of the year. And because the internet knows that the masochistic nature of talking about bad movies is far more entertaining, I'll save that for second place. So first, we'll talk about my 5 favorite films of 2013. Number 5. Ender's Game. I'll start off by saying that 2 critical friends of mine, some of my friends aren't very critical, but these 2 are very articulative about the movies they like and why they like them or why movies suck. In this case, these were both friends of mine who had read the Ender's Games books, which I have not. Both of them really liked this movie. One of my friends could see what needed to be done. You know, what they did with this film is they kind of streamlined it a little more. There was a whole other story arc that was going on in the book that was cut out of the film, but the way they did it in this movie is that they cut out and it made the story much more focused on Ender, which makes sense considering the film was called Ender's Game. So for the most part, I'm going to take it by their word that this was an adaptation that was done well, but as a movie on its own, and it was kind of hyped, I think, which is weird considering it didn't wind up making as much money as people were hoping it would, but for what it was, I thought it was a pretty good movie. I thought Ender was a really interesting character. He had a certain confidence about him. It was subtle, it was just calm, collected, and still in a professional manner. You know, he could take everything that the system was throwing at him and just pretty much keep his cool for the most part. The fact that this is a movie about military training almost makes it seem like it would be something that's very sterile and boring and just very much according to procedure. Given the fact that there's a military of kids, there is a certain schoolyard dynamic to it, which I thought was done really good. The fact that Moises Arias, Rico from Hannah Montana, was playing a guy in this movie, and the whole movie, I was getting deja vu. I'm like, I know that guy, I just don't know from where. And when I found out at the end of the movie, it blew my mind about who that was. So, good for Moises Arias for breaking out of Hannah Montana and not crashing and burning like other Hannah Montana co-stars have this year. The fact that the way they train is basically a zero-gravity King of the Hill or capture the flag or capture the other base, whatever you want to call it, it was awesome. And those scenes were the ones I looked most forward to in this film, just because it was fun to imagine. I feel like in the future this could be some kind of sporting event where they have these stun guns and these special suits and taking place in zero gravity. I think that could be a really cool sport. Hopefully my lifetime allows that to become a reality, because I would play that sport. In short, I would say this is a movie that is pretty serious tone for the most part, but it does include enough of the intrigue and the fun and the moral questions that keeps the viewer into it, so that's why it's my number 5 spot. Number 4. Pacific Rim. This movie was a surprise to me, mostly for the fact that less effort could have been put into it. Let's say this was given to Michael Bay, you know, giant monsters versus giant robots controlled by people. He could probably make that the biggest explosion testosterone fest you have ever seen in your life. You know, more so than he tries to do with Transformers. But that's just it. It could have gotten away with just that idea, but it didn't. It had Guillermo del Toro at the helm, who was a really big fan of giant monster, giant robot type anime cartoons like Neon Genesis Evangelion, and he took inspiration from that when making this movie. Another great thing about this movie is its scale. I really like how everything in this movie feels tremendous. Every punch thrown by either a Jaeger or a kaiju, the robots and the monsters, everything feels huge. And let me explain it in this way. When the Transformers in the Michael Bay movies are moving around, for the most part they don't feel like these big, giant, heavy things, because they tend to move very efficiently and very quickly from point A to point B. With the slow moving that happens in Pacific Rim, how every punch or kick or whatever anybody is doing, there's a hint of slowness to it because, you know, laws of gravity, things that are heavier have a harder time moving unless they have the right momentum. It is made to feel huge and leave a huge impact, and they did exactly that, so kudos to them. What surprised me most about this movie was the characters. You have a lot of general archetypes here. There's like the inspiring, determined commander, your basic hero who has something of a tragic past, the up-and-coming rookie who wants to prove themselves, who in this case is a woman in this movie, which I think is pretty cool. Not entirely because it's a woman, but just a woman that's written well. There's the quirky scientist characters who are really quite funny in this movie. I'm really glad we got to have a lot of what they were doing in this movie appear on screen. And I give the writers of this movie credit for being able to tie everything together so well. The main thing is that you never truly feel like something you're being shown is entirely useless to the plot. It serves some purpose to either inform a character's backstory or someone is off doing something, and you might get some of the quirky scientist bit, but ultimately they're always doing something that is relating to the story. Everything happening is leading up to something else big that's going to happen in the movie. That's another thing. They don't overuse the giant monster fights. They always put a decent chunk of time, a decent chunk of preparation, and something that needs to be accomplished before the next monster comes. It doesn't feel streamlined because this movie is long. I would say it's streamlined as possible as it could be given the story, and they do that very well. I never want to go back to the giant monsters until it's necessary. I'm always entertained by whatever's going on. So there you have it. Pacific Rim caught me off guard when I saw it, but I was very pleasantly surprised, and it was one of the most fun movies I've seen this year. I do hope it gets a sequel. Number 3. Saving Mr. Banks. So just in case you haven't already seen my casual review of Mary Poppins and Saving Mr. Banks or any of that, I will make the confession again. I don't have a conscious childhood memory of ever watching Mary Poppins. I owe it to Saving Mr. Banks for pushing me that extra edge just to sit down and watch Mary Poppins all the way through. And that edge was put on by the story of this movie. It showed the untold story about how P.L. Travers, the author of Mary Poppins, had to grant Walt Disney the rights to make Mary Poppins into a motion picture, even though they were pretty far along in development to what we know as Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. So things were tense. They were trying to do everything they could to please P.L. Travers, trying to make her see their side of things, but at the same time make sure it's something that she considers faithful to her source material. And just the way the trailers portrayed it, especially the comedic bits about how she was saying everything is wrong, it just looked like an interesting behind-the-scenes sort of thing. Emma Thompson as P.L. Travers was brilliant. She brought what I assume the filmmakers were going for was a heavy British versus American sort of standard type of comedy, in addition to all her nitpicks about what they were doing with the movie that she didn't like, she thought it was wrong. And I especially love the bit in the trailers where it shows her listening to one of the Sherman Brothers songs where they rhymed constable and responsible. She's like, that's not a word. Oh, we just made it up. I'll make it up. And then they just put the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious music sheet. They just kind of shuffle it out of their own sight, even though she can't see it. They're just made uncomfortable. It's like, oh, we made up this word. She is not going to like that word. That was hilarious. That was probably the best part of the trailer. That was the selling point for me. Tom Hanks as Walt Disney. Brilliant choice. I think Tom Hanks has this very unique, friendly charisma to him that I think is perfect for Walt Disney. But I also like that they showed a slightly different side of Disney. The businessman side who is very determined almost to the breaking point of making sure he gets what he wants in the end, but also a very sincere, polite man. They also show a slightly different side of Disney, one that to my knowledge wasn't one that they like to go public with. And this was like, he's smoking, he doesn't like to smoke in front of people, even though he smokes very frequently. He doesn't smoke in front of children. He has some standards about his image. They am swearing once or twice in this movie, which, they were pretty mild swears, but that's okay. Walt Disney is human too, and I think it's good that we got to see that in this movie. Spoiler alert, this is something I found out post watching the movie and post making my review on it, which I kind of regret. I think I should have touched on this in my review, but I'll touch on it now. In real life, P.L. Travers did not like Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. She disliked it vehemently. In this movie, they portray it, they show P.L. Travers at the premiere of the movie, rolling her eyes at the animation, so, you know, there's some consistency. But ultimately, the movie ends on a note that shows us that, according to Saving Mr. Banks, P.L. Travers really ultimately liked Mary Poppins. I'm not entirely sure how to feel about that now, considering that, you know, Disney blatantly lied to the audience about what the author ultimately thought of the movie. I mean, it's Disney, it's a happy ending, so I kind of get why they would do that, but at the same time, you know, knowing in real life that that was not the case, it makes me raise my eyebrow a little bit. Ultimately, it doesn't hurt the movie, because it's still a very touching story. It still shows a tone that I believe shows pure, honest creativity, and the fact that I can believe that these two very brilliant people, P.L. Travers and Walt Disney, very much are passionate about what they do, even if Walt Disney is a little more so on the business side, because, you know, he has to be. He's running a company. He still has this great passion for storytelling, and P.L. Travers has this great sentimental attachment to the characters she's created that were actually inspired by her childhood, according to this movie, and maybe according to real life, I don't know. But the fact that they got that feeling in there is what ultimately makes this a really good movie. And that's why it's my number 3. Number 2. Frozen. Frozen is a movie I've seen twice, and I think sometimes that's a true test of how much you like a movie, is if you watch it again and it's still really good, it still tugs at your heartstrings, still gives you chills in certain parts, and the music is still really fun to listen to, then I think you've got a pretty solid movie. What I like most about seeing it a second time is that you can kind of take a back seat to everybody else in the theater watching it, and since you've already seen it, you can look for all those subtle things that you didn't quite think about looking at the first time you're watching it, because, you know, you're just too engrossed in it. You have to take it all in at once. There's only so much you can soak up in one viewing. So in the second viewing, I got to see even more. I got to see different subtleties. I got to see how the movie held up for me a second time. And I got different emotional nuances that I could appreciate because I knew the story going in, and then I could think a little bit more about what was going on screen, and whew, it was just great. In my casual review near the beginning of December, I said my favorite song from Frozen was Let It Go. This is still true. The song is still stuck in my head as we speak. It still makes me super happy to listen to it. It still gives me chills. The scene itself is really good, and I just love it so much. I was really glad they got Idina Menzel to be in a Disney movie, because I know they've gotten her for the Hercules TV show as Cersei before. They also got her, I just found this out recently, for the movie Enchanted. She's in there too. She plays the main character, Patrick Dempsey's girlfriend. And I found that out recently. I'm insulted that Idina Menzel did not get a song in that movie. You had Idina Menzel in a Disney movie, and you did not give her a song. Okay, I'm getting off track here. The point is, Idina Menzel has gotten her dues at last, and it's fantastic. Then you have her sister Anna, who, by the way, has become my favorite Disney princess, purely for the fact of her personality. She's very laid back for the most part. She doesn't dig into too much of that proper princessy stuff. She only sticks her chin up all proper-like when she feels the need to, when it serves her purposes. All the other times she just loves to have fun. And she seems like the kind of princess I would want to hang out with, which is why she's my favorite. What made me very happy about the movie, however, is that it did not turn into a cutesy mess because of Olaf the Snowman. Based on the first teaser trailer that showed the reindeer Sven and Olaf the Snowman interacting, You know, you think it's gonna be one of those kinds of movies, but no, those are just the ones that get the kiddies and kind of laughing, and the parents who aren't as critical as I am kind of laughing too, so they think, oh, this is cute, I'll go take my kids to see this when it comes out. Which, you know, they should be contracted to do by now. I mean, it's Disney. Disney is kind of an obligation that you make when you become a parent. Anyway, I thought Olaf would be the kind to give you kind of diabetes from how cutesy he was being, in a very, very bad way, but he was not. He actually had a very unique charm to him that really rang true to me the second time I saw the movie. Like, when I reviewed it, initially I was like, Olaf's kind of cute, he kind of brings it down, but he's okay, I guess. Thought about it a little more. You know what? He's got that charm. Second time I saw the movie, Olaf has sold me. I have no objection to make about him whatsoever. He is a very charming, innocent character who does not overstep his boundaries on being all cutesy. So there you have it, folks. Frozen, my number 2 movie of 2013. And my number 1 favorite film of 2013, The Hunger Games: Catching Fire. Now, on one hand, how I've said in the past how I'm not a super fan of Lord of the Rings, but I very much respect them for all the effort and passion they put into what they do for it. The Hunger Games is something that I took to very easily. It was a very addicting book series to read, and I'm not even much of a reader anymore, so that's saying something. And I think the passion and intense emotion that is needed for a story like this is being done so well so far. The second movie was even better than the first one. I hope they carry this momentum through all 4 movies that they're going to make, because if they do, it's going to be awesome. Another thing people tend to judge most about adaptations in movie form is how impactful the big moments of the book are portrayed on screen. There are 2 of those moments that stand out to me particularly well. Obviously, spoiler alert. The first moment is when the Quarter Quell was announced, and that the people to be put into the Quarter Quell would be people who had won previous Hunger Games. It's bad enough that an ongoing theme in this movie is that some of the districts are starting to get restless with the capital, and the topic of rebellion is growing more and more every day because of what Katniss and R.I.P.D did at the end of the last Hunger Games movie. So they got a giant PR nightmare with President Snow and trying to stop the citizens from rebelling by behaving, keeping in line, and all that other stuff. So they've already got a ton of frustration built up inside, but then boom, they're like, oh no, you have to go back out in the arena and try and kill each other. Again. After you just got back. After you've already won the games, we're forcing you back into that arena, and that is just a moment where frustration breaks a lot of people. And I thought it was just so effective to have Haymitch take alcohol, his one source of solace in life, and just chucking it at his hologram TV screen or whatever. It is a tense scene and is really well done. Second one, and I promise I won't ramble too much about this one, was the death of the stylist, Cinna, played by Lenny Kravitz. You know, having read the book, I knew it was coming, but it was still a moment that kind of had me clenching my fist in anticipation, and then when it hit, it's just like, ugh. Another really fun part about this movie was the character of Joanna, and for starters, I'll start off with a really funny scene that introduced us to Joanna. She's in the elevator with Team District 12, and for whatever reason, she's changing clothes or something, so she just completely strips naked in front of them and does this. She's like, not uncomfortable at all, doesn't show anything because it's PG-13, of course, but I don't really care. It just created a certain tone and awkwardness in the elevator. It was hilarious. It was a really interesting introduction to that character. She also has this general angst that shows greatest in this particular moment where she's on a pre-game interview, and she essentially says, "Screw you, Capital, because I was told I was going to win the games, and then I was going to be left alone for the rest of my life to bask in riches. Now you're putting me out there? Fuck you!" And given that it's PG-13, I didn't honestly expect an F-bomb to drop. I mean, they did bleep it out, but wow. The last thing, and this was the only thing I was worried about the movie doing wrong, but thankfully they didn't. They cast Sam Claflin as Finnick Odair. I'd seen him as Pretty Boys in Snow White and the Huntsman and Pirates of the Caribbean 4, So I was thinking, okay, yeah, he's a pretty boy, but I don't want him to be a boring one. And thankfully, he was not. For lack of a better term, he brought his acting chops this time around, so thank goodness for that. I don't know what else I can say about this movie that many other people haven't already said. It's adapted really well, the emotional tone they need to go for is nailed perfectly, and the actors are giving it their all. Hunger Games: Catching Fire is a great movie, the only 10 out of 10 I gave this year. Now I know I opened up the video with a statement involving me saving the best for last, but funny enough, it was harder to find bad films that I've seen this year than I thought. Most of the films I saw this year were pretty mediocre, average, decent, nothing particularly bad. So without any further wait, my top 5 least favorite films of 2013. Number 5. The Fast and the Furious 6. To keep a long story short, I have something of a reputation among my friends and acquaintances for being a movie critic, and so sometimes I get people telling me I should see certain movies. Now, to the guy who insisted I see one of these movies and is probably reeling just a little bit that it's number 5 on my top 5 least favorites, don't freak out too much. I came with an idea about what The Fast and Furious was going to be, and I came out having those expectations met exactly. So from a certain point of view, you could say, I wasn't disappointed with the movie at all. It fulfilled everything I expected it to. And I will admit it was a bit of a stretch to put it on my list. At the same time, I feel it should be there because, again, some of the other films I saw were mediocre and decent, but I think I preferred them as opposed to this movie. My main criticisms are the illogical action, but I will admit it can look pretty cool at times. There isn't a lot to the characters that gets me emotionally invested, something that I feel makes a movie much stronger. But I have a feeling the crowd that likes these movies doesn't really look for that too much. Really, the best I can say about it is it's just a movie that's not for me. If you like it, good for you. There's a certain crowd for that, and I can respect that. Just not for me. Number 4. After Earth. The way I described this movie in my casual review of it is still probably the best way I can describe it now. It feels like Jaden maybe wanted to be in a movie with his dad, so Will Smith called up M. Night Shyamalan, who is a buddy of his or something, and they put something together, and they made the movie and put it out. I also don't remember as much of this movie as I feel I should. I remember the basic plot progression, but there wasn't a whole lot that stuck out to me. The delivery of most of the lines was very dull. Will Smith's general charisma that he has when he's on screen is pretty much gone. Even when he does dramatic roles like in I Am Legend, he's still able to have some charm, some charisma to him. In this movie, there is none. For most of the movie, Will Smith isn't actually out on the move doing anything. He's stuck at the ship with an injury, and his son and him have radio communication, so the entire time, he's just telling his son what to do, and his son is out there doing it. The father character is very militaristic and stingy, and that makes things pretty unpleasant for the most part. I feel little to no bond between the father and the son in this movie, which at the beginning I think was kind of the point. You feel like going through the harrowing experiences that this movie takes them through is supposed to bring them closer together. But if they don't spend any time together in the movie, you know, how are they supposed to develop that kind of connection? And accurately, it doesn't feel like they do. The end of the movie gives some indication that, hey, they have an emotional connection now, but it doesn't feel like that. The trailer promised a few things like some themes about overcoming fear. Fear is an illusion. The only thing there is you. Something like that. Didn't really feel much of that was paid off in the movie, or when it was paid off, it just didn't feel like a very strong payoff. It's like, okay, I'm over my fear now. Let's fight something. After Earth was boring, uninteresting, and it shows us that not even Will Smith's charisma is safe from Shyamalan's talent bending. Number 3. Identity Thief. For starters, it's a comedy that I didn't find funny, so that already kind of kills the enjoyment for me. I think this is also a movie that kind of abuses its R rating by getting in way too many swear words. I don't have that much against or am particularly uncomfortable with swearing. I just feel like if swearing is used more conservatively, then the impact of the swear words is made more dramatic. In other words, throwing out swear words like it was nothing lessens the value and impact of swear words itself. The story of this movie revolves around the very main character, played by Jason Bateman, whose first name is Sandy. He gets his identity stolen, his credit cards have been maxed out, and he tracks down the lady who stole his identity and made all these insane purchases and tries to get her to come quietly. But as expected, she's not so willing to go with him. She gets violent, she gets sweary, she's not very cooperative at all. So for the entire movie, he's pretty much dragged along as she's running away and hijinks ensue. There is not very much of this movie that feels pleasant because the main character is such an unpleasant human being with pretty disgusting moral standards. I think this movie was about 2 hours long, and I think only about 10 to 15 minutes of screen time shows the Melissa McCarthy character actually being a somewhat decent human being. Seeing through the rest of the movie where she's just kind of an indignant jerk is not pleasant. So there you have it, Identity Thief. I only had a few criticisms, but those few criticisms impacted the movie in a very negative way for me. Number 2. Planes. Who would have thought that of 2 racing movies that came out this year, the one with the snail would beat out the one with the plane? I'll start off with the easy criticism, Dane Cook as the protagonist. For the most part though, I don't actually blame Dane Cook himself, I just blame the fact that it's a pretty uninteresting, uninspired character with uninteresting, uninspired cliches that have been done to death. And I'm not saying that cliche is a bad thing, sometimes people really like certain cliches. But in addition to the tired cliches, this movie also has a lack of anything else very engaging or interesting to balance out the fact that it's so cliched. And as such, it fails on an even deeper level. Let's take Cars for example, the movie that this movie is a spin-off from. It is also very cliched. Some have noted that it rips off Doc Hollywood, but most of the characters interact with each other very well. They're kind of interesting, you kind of get a feel for them as a person, car, whatever you want to call them. Most of them has some interesting, even if they're not very well defined, personalities. I could go on, but really all I have to say is at least it's eons better than what we've got in Planes. What I don't like most about this is that it's made by Disney Toon Studios, the otherwise very defunct part of Disney that used to make its uninspired sequels to its really good movies. And it seems to me their standards have dropped even further. They've made an uninspired spin-off of Pixar's worst franchise. And the fact that this movie exists just makes me worry because given that it's a spin-off of Cars, I know there's some idiot out there who mistakes it for a Pixar movie. And Pixar, even if they did make Cars 2, is not deserving of a reputation like that. Take all I've said so far and add bad writing to the mix and you've got Planes. And you know the worst part about it? It's already got a sequel. It's coming out this year. And I'm probably gonna go see it. In my number 1 worst movie of 2013, R.I.P.D. The biggest reason this movie is at the number 1 spot is because of the level of disappointment that it gave me. Weirdly enough, going into most of the other movies on this list, I don't think I initially had hope that they would be very good. R.I.P.D. is the one film on this list that my hopes were actually kind of high for. Not too high, mind you, just high enough that I would enjoy myself in a capacity greater than the capacity to which I actually enjoyed myself. For one, the premise of the movie sounded kind of interesting. You know, there's a bunch of undead police officers from various periods of history, known as the Rest in Peace Department, R.I.P.D. for short, and their job was to go hunt down souls that still lingered on Earth past their time. Not to say there aren't a couple things about the movie that I liked. Jeff Bridges was in it for one. He played an old sheriff named Roy, an old Western sheriff. And he brought kind of the typical Jeff Bridges attitude to the role, which I was perfectly okay with. There's a story element where the R.I.P.D. agents are walking on Earth, but they're not seen as their true physical forms. They're seen as some kind of disguise. For example, Ryan Reynolds is an old Chinese guy with his disguise, and Jeff Bridges is like this hot supermodel. And a couple of the moments where they take advantage of that plot point and use it to make a joke of some kind, those are pretty funny, I will admit. But ultimately, those are its main saving graces. Ryan Reynolds is a very boring person to take the lead of this movie. So boring that the whole time he was talking about how he was never going to see his girlfriend again, not the way he should be able to see her, it came across more so as whining than me actually feeling sorry for him. I also think there are a couple missed opportunities that the movie didn't take advantage of with the characters that it had in its story. The first one is Ryan Reynolds is a cop from the present day, and Roy is a sheriff from the Old West. So obviously they're going to have two very different mindsets about certain things. We could have showed them just doing their everyday work and see how the connection between them develops and how they learn to work together with these two very different mindsets that the characters have because of the time period they come from. Or in a slightly different way of portraying that, they could have showed how the two work styles conflicted with each other because of the way they thought differently. Another thing that they could have done that they didn't do is that they didn't give Roy much emotional connection to his past, and I think if they did that, he would have been able to have a moment in the movie where Ryan Reynolds has been going on and on and on about how I'm never going to see my girlfriend again. Well, guess what? Everybody in the R.I.P.D. has to go through that. And Roy could have a moment to explain that to Ryan Reynolds. He's like, I know what you're going through, believe me. I had all these people that I loved back when I was sheriff in my town of wherever in the Old West. If a scene like that would have taken place, a whole new level of emotional understanding could have been realized. But they didn't. It's to my understanding that this was based on a comic of the same name, but R.I.P.D., on the idea it had on its own, could have done something like this, and it would have been so much better for it. And that's why R.I.P.D. is number one on the worst movies of 2013 for me. It had potential, and it dropped the ball. Thanks for watching, you guys. I'm trying to be optimistic about 2014's movies, but we have to deal with a double bae bomb this year. Ninja Turtles and Transformers 4. So we'll see.